Welcome to the CRM MVP podcast, episode number 35. And I'm here sitting at the Full Scope headquarters, global headquarters, with Patrick.lewis. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, Patrick and I worked together for a few years. Before I started Elevate Solutions, Patrick is a senior solution architect here at Full Scope. And I learned, a super valuable skill from you, and you know this, right? Which is, when I started doing consulting, when I started doing solution architecture, I was like a technical guy. I knew what the product did technically. I knew potentially like even the architecture of it, like what can we configure to accomplish a goal or to solve a problem. But one thing that I was missing heavily that I think you excel at is the sort of the human nature of it, the interaction with people, and talk about their, their actual pain when it comes to sales or whatever it is that we were going to do. And, one of the things that you saw when we started working together, because I was like an apprentice, right? Working with you.
Apprentice.
Was, one of the things that you suggested is that I read this book called Business Think, which, really taught me how to talk to people, essentially, in a way that it was most conducive to getting results or getting information, right? Instead of just reacting to what people say or I guess, just, I don't know how to say, like the lack of touch that sometimes you may have. Instead of doing that, there are ways in which you can disagree with somebody or provide feedback in a way that creates better results, right? So if someone comes in and says, I have an idea, what if we create 500 custom entities, right? There's a way to say, are you nuts? Or there's a way to follow Business Think or follow sort of your methodology, which is, we could do that. I think that could solve the problem, but maybe would affect performance a little bit. What if we instead did it this way? So you're still disagreeing with them, but you do it in a way that is sort of diffuses the confrontation in a sense, right?
I appreciate that perspective for sure. The main thing that you hit on there that we spent a lot of time talking about, right, is the difference between what I consider customer, vendor, and partner relationship.
Yeah.
Right? That's the difference. If we can get to the place where we are having a conversation, and when I say we, everybody knows that I'm talking about us because we're together and we're trying to figure this out. Usually you can get to a place where everybody agrees, or you can help them understand, or like you're mentioning, right? How do I help you change your mind?
Yeah.
Without having you realize that you're changing your mind, right, to move to a better solution. So I do spend a lot of time there. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I learned so much from you. On the time that I was here, the 4 years that I was here, I think that one of the things that I wanted to do for this episode is I was thinking about ideas and going by, again, some of that theme of some of those things that rarely get talked about in public. We have covered things in the past like best practice I don't follow, I disagree with. We've talked about essentially other topics that are confrontational in nature. I thought that the best topic for episode number 35 is to talk about confrontation. And by confrontation, I mean confrontation in projects. Typical scenarios that happens in not every project, but once in a while, and how do we deal with them? And I felt that there's really no one else better in the world to go over these
I appreciate that.
Than you. So I'm really happy you decided to come on board and record this with me. Again, I wrote down the top 10 sort of confrontational situations in implementations. I didn't write this list by myself. I wrote a few of them, and then I sent the idea to a couple of other friends like Joel Lindstrom, who's also a CRM MVP, and he added a couple to the list that I agree with. So I think we should just start tackling the list and go down and see what you think. But before we start, why don't you just tell people who are listening who might not be familiar with you, even though you speak at the Crm G Summit and once in a while you venture out there and share your wisdom. Why don't you tell people who you are, what's your experience with Dynamics and implementations overall, and what do you do here at Full Scope?
Perfect. So thank you for having me, Gus, by the way. I really appreciate the opportunity. I have I'm the old guy in the company. I've got about 30 years of experience in the industry doing CRM stuff. So I've worked with everything from Act databases to Siebel to Onyx to Pivotal to, you name it. I started my own business around Dynamics CRM when it was in beta.
Yeah.
Way back when. So because I believed in where Microsoft was going, and I still do. I was pretty impressed with the way that they were thinking about the business versus just the technology, and I think we'll get into some of that today. So that's how I got to where I am. Currently, I am the Director of Business Outcomes here at Full Scope, and what that means is that I spend a whole lot of my time on customer success, right? Our methodology for not only implementing, but what happens after implementation and how we help our customers get to the business outcomes that they envisioned when they started, right? That often get lost. So that's where I spend a bunch of my time.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. That's great. So again, I think that you have this unbelievable skill to diffuse confrontation. So I want to get your thoughts on sort of the top 10 confrontational situations when it comes to implementations. And again, these are not in any particular order. Not that number 1 is the one that happens the most, or number 10. These are just a list of things that I've seen in project, and I want to hear sort of your take on it. So number 1 is when it happens when the project lead on the customer side was not involved at all during the sales process, and now they want something different, right? So the sales process happens, somebody in leadership, the CIO, whoever, they look at the scope of work or the contract or whatever deliverables, functional documentation that the partner, you as a partner, deliver, they agree with it, let's do it. But then they set somebody else as the project lead who was not involved in the sales process, who was not involved in the discovery or any of that stuff, and now they disagree with the work that needs to be done, as the project is getting ready to start. So how do you deal with that?
That is a really good one, right? Because that happens all the time.
Right.
And it's an interesting problem because no one in that situation actually did anything wrong. It happens all the time, right? The C-levels decide this is what we want, we're going after this outcome, and they hand it off, and now you're working with somebody who has a completely different idea about what they want to do. And probably most of these, I'm going to start from the same place when I answer it, which is clarity is king. We've talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
And so the earlier in the process that you start to have that conversation with the sales lead that says, this is what I believe we're doing, and they can say, well, I agree or I disagree. You remember in our process, we do that very early on.
Yeah.
And from there, depending upon how confrontational, that becomes, you want to go into firefighting mode, right? Empathy mode, which is before I can help you get to someplace else, I have to understand what your belief is and what your expectation is. And the minute that you believe I understand what that is, now you'll listen to what I'm going to say. And what that should lead to, in most cases, is going to lead to us being able to decide that, okay, this makes sense for now, but you're going to help me get to what I want in phase 2, or we need to go have a conversation with the CEO, or whatever that is. My approach to that is let's get on the same side first, because there's no reason for confrontation.
Exactly.
And then ease into whatever the right solution is going to be. And that happens all the time.
I know. Yeah. No, I see it happen all the time. The other thing that I think is something you do very well is that you never leave like a red flag outstanding out there. Like any comment, anything that comes out in any call, as early or as late as it is, you always just sort of seem to put the project on pause and let's talk about this. Like if you hear somebody, say, let's say on iteration number 1 or whatever, the first ever meeting that you have with the team to start the implementation, they say something about like, I don't know, like when is the integration with SharePoint going to happen? And that wasn't on the plan. You will literally just stop. Okay, wait a minute. What did you just say? And like, let's talk about it. Whereas I think that a lot of solution architects, consultants out there would just brush it off and say like, I'll deal with that later.
Yeah, that's a great one. That comes from the book, right? That whole concept of a yellow light, right? Which is what we tend to do, and even salespeople tend to do, is you kind of hope that everything's going to work out and you don't have to deal with the part that's not right in front of you.
It'll probably
exactly
work out,
right. And so you just kind of keep going. And what you'll find when you've been doing this forever, those of you that are listening, it's going to come back and get you.
Oh, yeah.
Only it's going to come back and get you much later down the road, and it's going to be way more painful because you let them say that, And by the fact that you didn't address it, you affirmed it.
Yeah.
And so now,
agreeing with
yes,
it in a way.
they have that expectation. And so that is certainly a constant for me, which is if I hear something that doesn't make sense, let's talk about that really quick. So I heard you, Jim, say the SharePoint implementation. I know that's not in scope. Tell me what you're thinking there so we can get on the same page.
Right.
So
that's awesome. Yeah, great. Number 2, the executive sponsor of the project is on the IT side, and none of the users care about what they or what he or she thinks because they're salespeople or whatever, right? I mean, and I've talked about this, doing a sponsorship mapping exercise, which is, let me see who my sponsor is, let me put my users below, and then how do they connect? Like, where's the line that connects them? And it happens a lot with CIOs. CIOs seems to be the go-to choice for sponsors in a lot of projects. CIOs typically lead the IT side of the operation, and Dynamics 365 is used by the salespeople or the customer service people or project service people, not the IT people, right? Yep. So whenever information comes from the CIO, encouragement about use, hey guys, let's get into the system, it's like, who are you? Like, I don't really care about that. And again, I talk about doing a sponsorship exercise and to identify other sponsors, right? And sort of give okay, you're the primary sponsor to the CIO, and then start naming executive sponsors. Okay, the people who actually are in the line of command with the users, you guys will be executive sponsors. And now you have, you don't put the CIO to the side, you give him a primary sponsor, which is a really big, sounds big, right? And then the other people that can actually have some effect on the users will become executive sponsors. But how do you deal with that when you have that disparity of whoever is the project lead, has no power over the users?
Yeah, so that's a good one, right? Happens all the time. And that is absolutely a red flag. Early on when the entire conversation that you've had to getting to where you're going to close the deal has been just IT focused. The thing is that IT, especially the CIO, they're trying to help. They're trying to do the right thing. It's just that that's not what usually works in an implementation, as you know. I think that one of our responsibilities that a lot of us miss when we are working with a customer is we actually have to tell them early on what success looks like so that they can start to pattern how they work with us based on getting to a successful model. And what I mean by that is I can tell a customer that I have seen close to 0 successful implementations that were completely led by IT, where you had no business involvement and no direct line to somebody that they care about. And so, one of the concepts that we've talked about in the past is if I know something's going to happen, I'm going to tell you before it happens up front. I'm going to say, let me tell you what I'm worried about. I'm worried that I have you in the room and you have all these great ideas, which I love. I love that you're engaged. The problem is when you start to push this down into the organization, they're going to feel like, number one, who are you to tell us what to do? Number two, they weren't involved in it. Number three, you don't even know what we do, so how could this be right? Number four, I have enough work to do. I don't need to do this silly thing that you're putting on to me, which is completely different than what your goal is. Your goal is you're trying to help them, right?
Exactly.
But you start in this place that it's really hard to recover from. So I'm normally going to try to catch that early on. And similar to what you talked about, I'm going to say, so let's see how do we get somebody who's in the direct line of our users engaged in this. Because as you know, when this thing gets rolled out the door, one of the primary components of whether they're going to get adoption is going to be what kind of reinforcement they get. And if the reinforcement is coming from IT saying, come on, guys, I did everything you wanted.
That's just another tool IT wants me to use.
Exactly. Right.
That's what it becomes.
Completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And at the same time, this doesn't mean that IT shouldn't be involved in the project.
No, they
right?
should
just
absolutely be
shouldn't lead
involved.
Yeah, because you're going to need them for integrations. You're going to need them to connect to other systems. You're going to need them in the project. But you're right. It's hard to find a project led by IT, an Dynamics 365 or CRM implementation led by IT that actually works.
Yep. That gets adopted at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's really, really, really tough. So that's good. All right, number 3. You realize that a task that is needed on a project will take twice or 3 times to accomplish than whatever was calculated before we started the project. So we say, okay, yeah, the data migration, we can knock that out in a week. and then you get in there and you realize, oh, this is a 2-month ordeal. Like, this is going to take longer, or whatever other tasks. So how do you deal with that?
So these are tough, actually, as I listen to them. These are like the hardest problems that you run into, but also they come up pretty frequently, right? And so what you have there is one of the primary causes of friction in a project, right? That is missed expectations.
Yeah.
Right? Where they're thinking one thing, we're thinking something completely different, and we walk in. Now, when I talk about that empathy piece, that really comes into play here because technically they are right. They're right? If I told you that this is what it was going to be and I didn't spend enough time investigating to figure out what that is, technically you are right. The problem, of course, is that I'm in business.
Right.
Right? And so we have to come to some kind of an agreement on that. And so in that conversation, what I want to try to help the customer understand is what our estimate was based on and what we're now finding, and see if I can switch to a we conversation. Here's where we messed up. When we first started talking about what we were going to do here, we talked about moving accounts and contacts and opportunities. The thing that we didn't realize, and we certainly shouldn't have got in there deeper, we didn't realize that for you, an account is actually 57 related tables that are coming from all over the place.
Exactly.
With a lot of connections, and they don't exist, and the data doesn't actually match between the two systems we're moving in. So this is going to be way more difficult. And the thing that I'm worried about is this is not what we estimated for. And I don't know how you're feeling about budget or what you think our approach to this should be, but what do you think? So that I can switch it, right? So I can switch it to a we conversation. You understand this is the problem that we're trying to solve. Now, that doesn't mean that I might not come back someplace in there and say, you know what? We both kind of bear a little bit of this could have been better. So let me try and make it easier for you in this way. Or maybe I do this instead of that. Or maybe we help with X. Or maybe if you guys take this part that we would normally do and you have someone do that and give it to us, then we can come up with a way to kind of make it work. But it's getting into that synergistic mode where we can solve this problem. That's the most important.
Is that the same approach you would take, for example, in situations where the customer might be expecting a functionality that it wouldn't benefit them or it would be bad for them? So I'll give you an example. A long time ago, we worked in a project where the customer was coming from Salesforce and they had sort of an expectation of how functionality should work. I don't really remember exactly how it was. I think it was like lookups work differently or something. I don't remember exactly.
It's probably multi-select.
Yeah, it was something. I don't remember what it was.
A lot. Yeah.
But what I do know is that the way they explain the functionality used to work in Salesforce was worse than the way it was in Dynamics. I wish I remembered, but it was so long ago what it was exactly. But the customer was adamant about the fact that they wanted it to be that way. I think it was something like printing documents, and we have our own like single click to print document, and they were like, no, that's not how I want it. I want to click on it, pick a template. I want to then after that, pick the fields that I want. And we're like, but here's just one button that does it for you. And we had that confrontation in a lot of ways. They expected Dynamics to behave like Salesforce, but there were several things that Salesforce did worse than Dynamics. But they were adamant about the fact that they wanted us to make it worse because they wanted it to work like Salesforce. So
sure.
Is that the same approach that you take, which is, well, that's not what we were thinking when we scoped it? How do you deal with that conversation?
Yeah, so that's slightly different. Mm-hmm. And that's the place where, we were having a conversation earlier about the difference between a technician and a consultant, right? What we have to remember, those of us that are implementing, is that our customers hire us not just because we know how to put the field on the form. They hire us because we've done this a whole bunch of times for a lot of other customers, because we're bringing best practices to the table, and because we've taken an interest in understanding what they're trying to do, and our goal should be, how do I help you do this in the right way? And so my approach to that would be, so let's talk about that for a second, because I want to tell you what I'm worried about with the way that you're describing that. It could absolutely work. And you know what? You are the customer, so you can win this. But right. I would be wrong if I did not tell you that my experience tells me what our other consultants are telling me, whatever that is, and maybe I can paint a little bit longer vision for them so that they can go, oh, okay, that makes sense.
That's awesome.
Right? So similar but slightly different.
Yeah. So I like that approach of, Yeah, like you said, you can win because you're the customer, right? We'll do what you say.
I'll do what you say.
But I would be doing a disservice if I don't tell you that I disagree with that and this is why I disagree with it. And we'll still do what you say, but I like that. That's awesome.
And by the way, let's mark that down for later when you get upset so I can say, remember back.
Exactly. Let's record this call. All right. Number 4, you find out that someone assigned to your project team doesn't have the necessary skills or experience to perform tasks assigned to her or him. So again, I think this will happen more in organizations that are way larger, right? That have a ton of consultants and a ton of developers or whatever. And that certainly you find yourself as a solution architect on a project with, let's say, 1 or 2 developers assigned to you they don't have the skills that are needed to create the portal that you need or whatever it is. So how do you deal with being assigned? And sometimes it comes from the customer side too, depending on who's involved on that side. And they're adamant about the fact that, no, my guy will be able to pull create a staging table in SQL and get the data that we need or whatever it is. How do you deal with situations where the people that are on the project just don't have the skills to...
That's a tough one, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a military hierarchy in my mind, right? Which is first I want to try to address it with the person, which is if you're not getting what you need or you can't see how you're going to get to that need, then I want to have a conversation about that. Are you sure that you understand, X? How would you do Y? So that I can get a good idea of whether or not I'm right. Right? If I'm right that there's really no way for you to get there and do what it is that we need you to do, then I need to escalate that. And in most cases, that is going to be a project manager to project manager conversation, which is, so we're looking at this resource and we love him, right? He's a great guy and all of that, but here's what we're finding. What do you think we should do about that?
Right.
Right? I'm not saying kick him off. I'm just saying, what do you think we should do about that? Because here's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that if we hit the date on the 2nd and he hasn't done his part and I'm just not sure how he's going to get there, that's going to throw the whole time schedule off track, and I know that you've committed to delivering on X date. What do you think we should do?
Yeah, just put it back on them.
Right? I mean, and it's not like I don't want to help you. It's just that's not a problem that I can solve. We can solve it together, though, because maybe it is you pay a little bit more money and we have a resource take that, and in the meantime, we'll have your guy tag so that he actually learns as we go through the process. There's a number of synergetic, solutions. I just can't solve it by myself. I need you.
Exactly. That's awesome. Awesome. Okay, number 5, and this is a common one too. The customer was told something by our sales team before they signed the contract that it's impossible now that the project started and the contract is signed. So whether that is time-wise, like we'll deliver by October 1st or whatever, or whether that's functionality-wise. It will work on the Outlook for Mac or whatever. Like they'll just promise something. They say, okay, no problem, I signed the contract. Whatever that is. It could be technically, it could be logistically, we just can't do it. I know that in the past, for example, I've been involved in projects where customers want the exact consultant they had before. So it will be phase 2 or phase 3, and they'll say, okay, I'll do it as long as Michelle is the solution, or whatever. Like They'll ask for something, and you agree and sign the contract. Now the project's about to start, and that's not possible. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so that's a couple of different scenarios. All of them have happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Before. Back to your earlier comments, I'm a big yellow light, red light guy. And to me, what I don't want to do is let's just kind of continue to move forward and we'll figure it out as we go. And now we're expending hours that we may not get paid for because we're not clear about what we're going to do. So I will try and resolve that with the customer. There are a number of ways to resolve the missing resource thing, right? So this is what we thought at the time.
Yeah.
And now, that resource is on another project. What we could do is we could wait 6 months until she's finished and bring her on board. I didn't think that was the right thing for you because there is another option for whatever the problem is.
Yeah.
It's just not what they want.
I think the toughest ones are the ones that are functionality-wise.
Yes.
When they promise something that is impossible.
Yes. And so you have to get clear, and that often means bringing the person who sold that back to them. And, one thing that I'm completely against, as you know, is lying. I'm just not going to lie about it. Yeah. If we said that and that was a mistake, then we need to have a conversation and say, so here's what we thought at the time, and here's what we've actually found out.
Yeah.
And so either way, that work has got to be done or that work is going to be different, and we're in the early stages. So let's agree on what that is. The fear, of course, is that anytime you do that, the customer is going to say, well, just forget it. I'm not going to do it. I find that if you have built what you're doing on value, on what the business gets at the end of the day, Gus, you and I both know that one single bit of functionality is not going to be the reason why you do or do not succeed. It's not. But if you're dealing specifically with IT and there's no business value and they think these 4 functions are why I'm working with you, that's a risk. You're in the wrong place. But either way, you've got to have the conversation, and deal with it. Either decide to, we've had projects not go forward because that happened. Doesn't happen too often.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and in other cases too, sometimes they sell a functionality that is not ready yet, that maybe Microsoft announced but they haven't released it or whatever it is. And in some cases you're just able to say, well, let's do it in phase 2, but all of this other stuff that we know it's available and we know it exists, we can start working on it right now. So it all depends on sort of what's missing, but I see that situation happens a lot, which is salespeople tell them something, and then when it gets to you as a solution architect, you're like, yeah, that's impossible though.
Yeah, I will oftentimes in that situation where you're getting ready to walk into that situation with the customer, they'll talk about that functionality or whatever it is, and I might just say, what if we didn't have that part? Just to understand, how big a problem this is going to be, right?
Well, you're the only partner who said it's possible. So that's
exactly.
a deal breaker.
Ooh. Exactly. That's a tough one, though.
I know. Okay, number 6. This one was suggested by Joel. How do you deal with dysfunctional organizations where the business and the IT just hate each other? They don't work together.
That's a good one, right? And that happens. So our role in a project is to do the best that we can do. In my mind, to bring the business and the IT team together. And sometimes it's different business departments, right? It's marketing and sales that don't get along or whatever it is. But doing what we do, you have to understand that you can only do what you can do, right? What we can make happen. I can't change the organization. And so we want to understand where we are, and we want to talk about those things up front and just say it. You know me, right? I'm going to say, I feel like, right? This is about me. I feel like we don't exactly agree. When I'm talking to the CIO and when I'm talking to you, it feels like we're on completely different pages. I'm not clear how we're going to get through the project like that. What do you think? Right? It's always that way for me. But I don't like to hide that stuff when I see it. Let's just talk about it and figure out how to work around it. Yeah. Right? And it may be at the end of the day that our job is to just get it done, knowing they're going to be dysfunctional at the end because they were dysfunctional when you got there, and you've got to figure out how to get around that. But I don't like that solution.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the reason they're dysfunctional is because they don't talk. They think they're coming from completely different places. And sometimes, if you're in that mode, you can get in the room with them and say things like, here's what I'm worried about. As I listen to us talk, I can see that we are not on the same page at all. And I can tell you what success looks like, and this is not it. Yeah. So we'll do whatever you tell us to do because you're the customer. This is a really hard conversation. Most people aren't going to have this conversation. But I actually, one of the things that you know about me is I feel like that's suffering. When everybody's trying to do something good, but you're having just this conflict and dumb things that don't matter, I want to try to figure that out, and just address it head on and say what it is. And if we agree that we're going to hate each other at the end and that's just what it's going to be, then fine. That's just, the best that we can do. At least
we know.
I like that conversation, though. I do. I have seen companies in the moment where somebody says out loud, this function is right here. I'm just an outsider, so you can be mad at me if you want, but this is what I see. And then you get into a real conversation about what the business needs and about why they were going to fail anyway if you didn't get to whatever this is, and you end up doing more for the business than the software did at the end of the day.
Exactly. And that also happens sometimes between divisions of the same department.
Absolutely.
Like you would have the same salespeople, but different departments that sell different products just operate completely differently. They disagree with the approach or whatever it is, and sometimes it's pretty tough to deal with that. We're having one of those situations right now with a customer where one division who is like hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue on this billion-dollar company division, they want to implement Dynamics like yesterday. They want to do it. They are invested. The essentially the CEO of that division, the lead of that division, he's the VP of the company. He wants to do it. He's like, guys, I'm on board. Like, let's do this thing. But the whole company wants to implement Dynamics, not just that one division. And the other divisions are sort of like, do I really need it? Like, I sell to government customers. Like, why do I need a Dynamics system? So it's just so frustrating. And I've met with him like privately, and I've talked to him about it. And he's like, man, it's just, does this happen to you? Does this happen to customers you have that I'm here eager to implement this thing and adopt it? Like, I love it. I'm ready to go. But then all these, like my colleagues, the heads of the other divisions are moving so slow, and there's this conflict. And it's funny because sometimes we have calls that he'll be like, well, can I just get my own instance? And then they can decide what to do later. It's like, well, no, because we're trying to get some cross-selling happens when your team completes a sell and could trigger an opportunity of another team. And so it's really, really interesting to see the dynamics of this company, because for me as a partner, I just sit back and I'm like, I want to start too. Like, I don't know what I can tell you. Like, so how do you deal with that? Those situations like that? It's just tough.
That's a great one, and that's a tough. That's tough for people in our position, because if you don't have that bent, right? If you're really technical, it's really hard to help. You don't know how to help. If you have the consultant, slightly salesperson bent, you can kind of get it, right? You can jump in, because if it were me, what I would say is they're actually telling you what the problem is. The guys that work in government are telling you that I don't know what good it's going to be to me. And so you haven't actually sold it to them, but you feel like you need to get them to buy in before we go forward. So we're probably going to have to bite off a mini something and sell it to them. We're not going to do everything in the whole world, but what are the 5 things that we know if they had it, they could do? And it might be just as easy as doing a quick prototype and making a video that you send to them that says, top 5 ways your life is going to be better if you can actually see who's talking to your accounts, right? Or whatever that is.
Yeah.
But you do have to get that top level buy-in, or you're wasting your time, I can tell you.
Exactly.
And small pieces might be it. It doesn't have to be part of the whole thing, but it does have to be. I get that 70% of this is I have to sell it to you, because nobody's going to love it. That's the thing that nobody says out loud, right? You go and you talk to the sales manager of whatever company, and he says, I love it. I can't wait to get it in. I just want a system that's so simple and easy that the salespeople open it up first thing at the beginning of the day, and they spend all their time in there, and they love it, and they can't wait, and it's so simple, and it works just like their iPhone, right? And what you want to do in the sale is you want to say, perfect, I totally understand what you're saying. But what we know is that's not true. For a number of reasons, right? Not just because it's not that simple,
right,
but because whatever you are asking them to do is different than what they're doing today. It is going to be hard.
Yeah.
So just deal with that, approach it in that way, but give them enough that they can feel like, okay, I'm going to get something out of it. I see the bigger picture and why we're doing it. If you don't do that part, then it does just become another piece of software.
Yeah, I always use the analogy of your first smartphone, right? I always tell people, I said, look, it's going to be better, but it's going to be different, and it's going to be frustrating at first. It's like your first smartphone. My first smartphone was a BlackBerry, and I remember going from a flip phone, like a Motorola Razr or whatever I had, to a BlackBerry, right? This big thing with a rolling thing on the side and a full QWERTY keyboard, right? It was a huge phone. And I just remember looking at it and be like, I'm never going to learn how to use this thing. This is insane. I mean, it has 100 buttons, and I don't know what to do. But like a week later, I couldn't live without the BlackBerry, right? Just responding to emails and doing all kinds of stuff that was a huge pain on the flip phone, right? So Dynamics is just like that. I always tell people it's just like that. Think about your first smartphone and you thinking that you're never going to learn how to use it, and now you're a wizard with it, right? And you can't live without it. You love your phone. That's exactly how Dynamics is going to be. But yeah, it's interesting, that comment about, I just want it to be super easy like their iPhone.
Every time.
Yeah, well, we'll try to make it as
we will go as far in that direction as we can, Mr. Customer.
Exactly. That's awesome. Okay, number 7, the customer is taking forever to get their data. That happens a lot, right? Because, again, I don't think this is unique to both of our companies. I think that a lot of partners go through this process, which is when it comes to data, we understand that the customer knows their data better than us. And we rely on them to get it for us, right? And we can sort of lead them and have conversations about, do you really need 8-year-old leads? And like we can have conversations about how much data we need. But when it comes time to getting it and putting it on a place that we can use it and import it or migrate it or whatever, it's mostly on the customer. And sometimes it just takes forever. I've done implementations, I'm sure you have too, where, for example, the contact information is just in people's Outlook. And you're depending on all the salespeople because they work from home or whatever to do an export of their contacts. And no one wants to go live unless my contacts are in there. And you say, well, don't worry. Once we go live, you just click on track and they all go there, the ones that you want. Yeah, but we want to see them there doing training. Okay, but like you're just sort of stuck. And again, that's just an example of using Outlook, but sometimes it's with data too, like whether they're using another system, like the ones you work with in the past, or they're using a proprietary system, whatever it is. We typically put that responsibility on the customer, and sometimes it takes them forever to get it.
Yeah. So that includes components of almost everything that we've talked about in my mind, right? It happens so often that it is something that we bring up, and I know you guys probably do too, very early in the process now, because it is, in all likelihood, I will tell customers at the very beginning, if there is anything, because you're telling me this needs to go live March 1st, whatever that date is, I'm with you, I love it, let's go get this thing installed, right, and up and running. If there's anything that's going to throw us off from whatever it is that we're planning to do, it is going to be data. It's data every time. Always. And I'll tell you why. You're going to find out that the data isn't as clean as you thought, and you're going to have to do all this work. You're going to find out that, we don't actually own our data. I've got to go through this third-party vendor who has to go through X and who won't give it to me, or whatever that is. Or it's going to be, we actually thought that we had a guy that could write SQL queries that could get our data, but he really can't.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that I'm going to ask you as we walk away to go start trying to figure out now. And you're doing that for 2 reasons. One, because if they go start trying to figure it out now, there's a chance that you have an answer by the time you get there, or at least they realize it's going to be a problem early enough for you to work it into the contract. And if not, then at least as you're going forward, the first bump you hit, you're going to go right back to that conversation. So, Mr. Project Manager, here's the thing, right? If we look at the project, the first set of data was supposed to be in on Tuesday when we have our next workshop, and it's pretty obvious that it's not going to get there. Remember when I was saying early on that if anything was going to be a problem, data was going to be it, and here we are. What do you think we should do? Right, back to what do you think? Because I can't solve that. It's either important enough for you that we get everything going, or it's not. There's nothing for me to do. And then you could say, well, I just don't know how to do it, or I don't know how I'm going to fix it. And that leads to other things, which is, so what happens if the date slips? Yeah. Right? And they might say nothing, it doesn't matter to us. And then you, of course, might say, the thing I'm worried about, though, is that on our teams, the way that the people work on the project, the way the resource work is based on, we had this timeline, and I don't know what will happen if Jim ends up moving to another project because we're not moving fast enough. Yeah. Is that going to be right? I'm just going to test all the things that are going to actually happen to see if I can help them get motivated to move where we need to.
Yeah, absolutely. I get like this theme with you that you use this thing that we call persuasion, which is you're essentially you already know the answer, but you're getting them to tell you what the answer will be. And when I think about the data, that also applies to other things. Like sometimes you see it with business processes, right? We need to put this business process in place for your opportunities and projects or whatever, but you guys need to design what the process is going to be like, because right now you're supposed to have a process, but no one follows it, right? Because you have people who have been selling for 30 years and they don't need to follow a process or whatever. We have to come up with a standardized process that everyone will follow, because we're going to use business process flows or whatever it is. The navigation, the progression of the sales process will be in a way. You guys have to come up with that, and sometimes it just takes them forever to agree.
Yep, exact same. You hit on a couple of points there, right? That is absolutely true. There are a number of places where that happens. it goes back to our original conversation, though, about customer, vendor versus partner, right, for me, because I can't do it by myself. And as consultants, either technical or otherwise, we have this habit of feeling like, number one, we have to know all the answers, and number two, once they say, here, you have the project, that everything is our responsibility, and that's not true, right? It needs to be joint responsibility, and let's just talk about it. I expect you to call me out if I said I was going to do something or somebody was going to be there, but I also expect for you to be comfortable that I'm going to call you out too. And you remember from the way that we work, we used to get a lot of, it feels like you're telling the customer what to do. Well, in some cases, that's what they're paying me for.
Exactly.
I've done this a whole bunch of times. Let me tell you what's going to happen.
And I think that's where it helps to have all of this background that is not necessarily Dynamics related. Like when we did projects where people use Sandler selling, for example, you're an expert on that, and you could call people out on their process, right? When you talk about
that was fun, wasn't it?
That was awesome, right? So people are talking about, well, this is the process that we follow, and you're like, why? That's not how it's supposed to work. I mean, that is part of your own training and learning new things. But for people listening in, I know you've mentioned it a couple times, the idea between client, vendor versus partner. When you mention that, and I know because we've talked about this before, but for those listening, what do you mean by that? What do you mean? What's the difference between being someone's partner and having a client-vendor relationship?
Yeah, so there are so many places in a project where if that's what you have. A partner relationship is we're in this thing together. We're going to try to figure it out. You have some responsibilities. We have some responsibilities, and you know that all the way through, and you can tell just in the tone, right? Customer vendor, you imagine you're doing your requirements gathering. And the requirements gathering is them all sitting around the table with their arms crossed saying, I want this and I want that.
Telling you what to do,
right?
yeah.
And then you go off and you build it, whatever it is that you thought you heard them say, and then you come back and they have their arms crossed and they tell you all the things that are wrong with that. And then you go back and you're trying to solve all these problems that really you shouldn't be solving because you don't know the business, but they're not engaged. You're just the vendor. Go build what I said for you to build. Yeah. And even if it's not going to work, you're not in a place where they're taking that from you. Just build what we say, right? That's a customer-vendor relationship. And sometimes that's what you have. So what I mean by that is I'm going for a partner relationship every time from the beginning, but I want to know where I am. If I'm not in a partner relationship, then I'm going to try to get to one. If I'm not, then I'm going to play vendor like nobody's business. Right? Now I need to close my walls in, and I need to make sure that my I's are dotted, right?
Exactly.
And we're going to go through, and I'm going to lock you in to just get out of that. I don't like that mode, but sometimes you just have to finish. And oftentimes that's based on what kind of relationship you have, right? In a customer-vendor relationship, I can't actually say, I'm looking at the tables right now and it's 50 versus the 2 that we thought, because what they're going to say, customer-vendor, is they're going to say, well, you should have thought about that before you signed the contract.
Exactly.
And now I know exactly where I am. Right.
We also mentioned the Sandler methodology. How much of that do you think you use for consulting?
That is a no one has ever asked me that question.
Yeah.
Gus, I have to tell you.
Because there's a lot of Sandler rules that are perfect for consulting, right? The upfront contracts, for example, yes. it's huge. On every iteration, you should start with an upfront contract. This is what we're going to do.
Absolutely.
Is that what you think? Am I covering what you think we're going to do? Yeah, we all agree that this is what we're going to do. So we have an agreement. The not spilling your candy on the lobby, like all of these rules are, I feel that are highly valuable when you're a solution architect, when you're a consultant as well.
Absolutely.
How much of that do you use?
So I would say that Sandler, your where you end up is cumulative, right, over your life's experience.
Yeah.
Sandler has shaped how I consult, to be honest with you, right? If you think about things like reversing, right? We've talked about reversing.
The whole time.
Right? How much better is that for a consultant if you understand that the question that the customer is asking you is not the question? And so I shouldn't answer that question in most cases. I really need to get down to what is it that you're actually asking me, and the techniques that you use to make that happen. I use that all the time. Firefighting is my thing, right? That's 100% of what my job used to be, which is when everybody was upset, go draw Patrick in and he'll figure it out.
Exactly.
And that was 80% Sandler techniques, right? I need to understand.
And here's the funny thing: is like I work with you, and I learn a lot. But then after I left to start Elevate, I went to Sandler training because I wanted to learn how people sell. Because I felt that it would make me a better solution architect. I didn't go to learn how to sell, and it was interesting to sit in a room with people who sell like whatever equipment and all kinds of stuff. Right? It was a room, medical devices, like all kinds of people. And as they were teaching us all this stuff, it was like a 2-day class or 3-day class. I don't remember. All I remember is you using that on a project before. For example, there was one occasion where they were talking about bracketing. I don't know if you remember what that is, but it's how do you gauge the level of comfort for a customer when it comes to timing or money or whatever it is. We were talking about how can you guess what their budget is without asking them what the budget is or something? Mm-hmm. So they were sort of talking about bracketing and say, look, if we do this is going to be this much, or it could be in time, right? In order for us to go live this day, this is how much we're going to do. Or we could go live this other day and we can do this much. And we can go live. Having a list of options like that allows the customer to say like, yeah, I think B is the one that looks more like us or whatever it is. And you start figuring out what it is. So they use the example with budgets, and they said, look, if you can buy this much, right, we can give you this much percentage off. If you can buy this much, we can deliver by this day or free shipping or whatever. Which of these options do you like best?
Sure.
And they will be like, I like C. And then you start thinking, it's like, okay, so then they have money. They just care about the shipping. And just by doing that, another exercise we did that I didn't know I was part of. So I got tricked into this one. It was for how long you can have a conversation where you only ask questions. You're asking questions and follow-up questions and follow-up questions and follow-up questions. And the lesson was, instead of just talking, you should ask questions and listen, right? And then ask follow-up questions and ask follow-up questions. Because
Why?
in a lot of cases, exactly, you're using it now. In a lot of cases, the first answer is not the right answer, what you're looking for, right? So I think we got to like 18 questions or something with me until I realized, like, wait a minute.
Yes. See, and the value of that exercise, this is great for consultants, totally off topic, but this is great for consultants because the value of that exercise is the reason why you don't ask question after question is because you think that the person is going to notice and that they're going to say, he's not answering my question, so I need to answer. That's actually not true. Yeah. Right? What you learn in that environment is you learn how to soften the question, which is, that is a great question that you're asking me. Why'd you start with that one? Right? You're giving them feedback that is not, I'm not going to answer your question. But the truth at the end of the day is that people want to talk anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I remember he started something. It's like, why are you here? Or something like that on the train. I'm like, well, because I want to understand how salespeople sell. So that makes me a better solution architect. And then the next question was something like, so how does it affect you if you didn't know how people sell? Like, how would you do your job? And then I would say something else, and he'll be like, okay, so by finishing this, what is it that you're able to accomplish? And he just kept on going and digging and digging and digging and got all this information from me, which I thought we were just, because it was like right after a break or whatever. And then, at some point he was like, well, that was 18 questions that I asked straight, in a row. And you can see how you can lead a conversation and get so much information from people by just asking and asking and asking questions. So it was a great exercise, but again, I learn a lot, and I recommend it to people. Like if you have the opportunity to go and take Sandler training or some other sales methodology, I'm sure the other ones are good too. It's really good. Like, you don't only learn how to sell, but you learn how to do other things or how to use those skills for consulting in our case.
What's funny is I'll tell you one story and we'll get off it, but I used to train Sandler, as you know.
Yeah.
And I had a guy that I was training who I couldn't get him over the hump to understand why the questioning, asking, and answering process was so important. He was, people will notice all of this stuff, he would tell me. And so one night I took him out to a bar. He was young. And I said, okay, I want you to go try it on that girl right there that you're looking at that it's just an exercise to go try.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell you what ended up happening, based on that conversation and him letting her talk for 2 hours and her saying, "You're such a great conversationalist," and blah, 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 and where that whole thing ended up.
Right.
But he ended up being probably the best Sandler
He learned his
trainee
lesson.
that I ever had. Yeah, it was amazing.
Huge impact. All right. So let's get back to the list here. Number 8, personality conflicts or people who bring personal issues to work. That happens once in a while. It hasn't happened. I'm trying to remember. It hasn't been sort of a showstopper for me on a project before. Yeah, I've been in projects where people, get pregnant and have to leave or whatever it is, and that's happened. And people, I'm sure, have personal problems all the time. It's just never been a showstopper for me. But in the past, I've been in a couple of situations where it's been tough. Before I even started with CRM, I used to work in a company where one of our employees was going through a personal problem. I think it was. I think she was here from Latin America or something, and her mom wanted to come to the birth of the granddaughter of my coworker's daughter or whatever it was, and she couldn't get a visa, and so it was like daily grind, and that can affect a business when you're
Sure.
going through that with somebody that you grow close to, right? It affects the business in that respect. And in the past, we've worked sometimes with consultants again or coworkers that are going through problems, but I've never seen it in a project. Have you had situations where personal conflicts or problems have potentially derail a whole implementation?
Sure. I mean, I've certainly had instances where you've got people on the project team that have conflict that has nothing to do with the project that is absolutely affecting the project, right? So
Wow.
It doesn't matter what this person says, I'm going to disagree with it because they're the ones that's saying it, even if it doesn't make sense. So you've got this dynamic, and sometimes the company dynamic is in that way. And, my approach to that is always the same, which if there are things that are abnormal that are happening, I want to talk about it. And so, as awkward as that often is for people, I will say something like, I'm not sure, but it sounds like you're mad at me, not that we're trying to solve this. And did I do something? That's a Sandler technique, by the way. Because what anybody is going to do is they're going to back off and realize what they're doing, and now you can find out what's really going on. No, it's not you. It's just that blah, blah, right? And you release that tension, and then you can go forward. Most people won't ask that question.
Right.
Because you're just like, I can't wait to get off this call.
Awkward.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Or whatever it is. But, they call me the touchy-feely guy here, as you know. And because that to me feels like suffering, right? When you're just right at your core, you're angry or you're mad or you're frustrated or whatever it is, and you got all of that bottled up, that's suffering to me. And what I'd like to do is if there's a chance to just get you to talk about what's really happening for 2 minutes, you may end up being my greatest customer ever.
Exactly.
Right, if I can get you there. So
That's awesome. Let's go to number 9. The awkward situation where Microsoft functionality gets dropped between the sales process and project completion. Recently, for example, one of the functionalities that got dropped literally is something that I was relying on for a project, which is Customer Insights. I thought Customer Insights was a great product. I think that it wasn't good for every customer. It wasn't something that you're going to use on every project. But whenever you found a match, it was like the hammer and the match was a nail. It was perfect for it.
Sure.
And I found a prospect, essentially a customer, that would have been a perfect match for it. And the reason for that is they are a massive company. And Customer Insights allowed us to see all of the information we have about a customer in our entire system. So you bring all of your systems, AR or your ERP system information, Exchange, CRM, like all of the computer systems you have within your organization, plus any external information. So stuff that they post in LinkedIn and social networks, and
Sure.
everything just gets aggregated in the system. Not only shows it to you, But then the artificial intelligence of Azure, and I typically don't get technical on this podcast, but the artificial intelligence side from Azure, the cognitive services, can analyze patterns on customers and how they buy. So by analyzing your patterns, it will say, you have a 80% chance of closing this opportunity because other customers who bought that before have had the same volume and frequency of emails. They've also talked about you on Twitter or whatever it is. It's able to look at all of the evidence and find patterns on the data and tell you like the next best action. Essentially, it says, look, if I were you, I would make an appointment in person with this guy because that would increase your chances of closing by 14% or whatever it is. So the system is doing this for you. It's unbelievable, right? Or it was unbelievable. And recently, just a few weeks ago, Microsoft just pulled the plug on it, right? And I never told the prospect that I was implementing customer insights. I just said like, oh man, there's a product for you guys. Like there's something like this thing is going to be amazing. And then they suddenly said, we're getting rid of it. So how do you deal with situations where the plug is just pulled and, you're in the middle of it. You were relying on that piece of functionality or whatever it is.
Yeah, you know exactly what I'm going to say. Head on, right? Which is that next conversation with the customer needs to be something along the lines of, we have a problem. I can't believe it because I spent all night trying to figure out exactly what happened. But there are sometimes we love Microsoft, right? I do. I love the product. I love what they've done or whatever. But there are some times where we have to make it really clear, that Microsoft is Microsoft and they make decisions that we can't control. And I am on your side. I'm with you. And so I sat up last night trying to figure out, number one, was this true? And number two, was there a workaround? So I have 3 different ways for us to think about this, and then we can decide. Number one, we could just drop it all together and not do that part and do everything else and find some value over here. We can patch it because I have this other thing that I could do that's similar. The problem is it's more hours, so we'd have to inflate the budget a little bit to make that work. Or we can kind of trust that we just move forward and Microsoft's going to bring some portion of that back later because they often do that. Or we can make another decision downstream. What do you think we should do? Right?
Just put it back on.
Right? We got to get right.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything. I'm trying to help you. I love you, and that stuff happens. And
I think customer insights is just an example that doesn't affect a lot of people. But for example, when they decided to discontinue the Outlook client, which was also recent, and now they brought it back, right? Somebody complained, and they're like, "Oh, don't worry, we'll keep it." But if you're in a project, and suddenly they say, "Oh yeah, by the way, that Outlook client that you were waiting for because you wanted to use offline access, whatever it is, it's Microsoft just announced they're going to get rid of it."
Yep. The work there, though, the part that's different between you and the next guy should be that I understand what you were trying to do, and I'm not going to show up and just say, well, it's not there anymore. I'm going to show up and say, I've thought about it, and here are the options that I think that we have. And one interesting thing about what you just did was you told a story where this had happened before, and that's actually that's a bridge that many consultants don't cross. Which is when I'm with a customer, I would have that conversation with them. I would say, they took this thing away and blah, 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 and I'm worried they're not going to bring it back. But I got to tell you, we had a customer with the Outlook client and blah, 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 and it did come back. So we've got to work that into our thinking too. And then I'm going to actually give you my opinion. I'm going to say, here's what I think is going to happen. I could be totally wrong, so don't hold me to it. So that we're in this together. What do you think we should do? And then move forward. I think it's that little part that will get you over, which is I care. It's not me. I checked. I have some options. I have an opinion.
Yeah.
What do you think we should do? So often as consultants, what I see, the thing that frustrates me the most is when we are afraid to help our customer make a decision because we don't want to get blamed. As an example, I show up, you ask me, how could we do X with a form or whatever it is? And I show up and I say, you could do it this way, or you could do it that way, or you could do it this way. And that's it. That's 100% of, which one do you want? Which is completely different than, so there are 3 different ways that we can do that. Based on what I know about you and what you're trying to go, here's the one I would do, and I'll tell you why. I don't know everything, but here's what I think. And now we can have a conversation about my opinion, and I brought my best practice to the table, and I can help you, because in some of these larger organizations, as you know, that difference is going to cost you 4 months of decision making.
Yeah.
Right? If I don't help you and just let you go, I'm going to go because they don't know how to make the decision.
Definitely. And it also happens, and I think going by that is, it also happens sometimes you get questions that you can answer, but you know it will be bad for them.
Yep. And
I'm trying to think of an example, but I remember in the past that I've gotten emails from customers with questions like, can I install Click Dimensions? So just making something up. And then I would say yes, but you don't need it. So it's sort of like you could answer and just let it go, or you could add your 2 cents and prevent a potential disaster. I'm trying to remember examples in the past that are specific, but I know that I've done it in the past a couple of times, and we had an example of someone asking if you can email a report in PDF, for example. And instead of doing that, instead of saying, yeah, but you need, to bring your data on premise so we can use a system on premise that will email the, and doing something complicated, just answering the question. Instead, you just ask the question, well, what are you trying to do? Well, every week we just want our people to see the sales pipeline. Okay, we can do that with a dashboard. Would that work? Like sometimes just asking that follow-up question can let you suggest something even more impactful and better.
Sandler.
Yeah. Sandler,
right?
Exactly.
That's not actually the question I should be answering, right? Can you install Click Dimensions, right? What I might say in that scenario is, I did not expect to get that question from you today. What are you guys thinking? Right? And now we can have a conversation about what you're really trying to do because I understand it. I love it. Yep.
That's awesome. Okay, and last one, number 10 of the top 10 confrontational situations and implementations. This one is interesting. Working with ISV vendors that are unresponsive or have poor collaboration. Sometimes we're doing implementations that will rely on solutions from ISV vendors. We just talked about Click Dimensions. Click Dimensions is typically really, really good. As an ISV, of course, great collaboration with them. But there are other ISVs out there or solutions out there that are great, but then the ISV vendor that implements the solution or does the training or whatever it is, depending on what the solution is, they sometimes are not as good. The problem is that in a lot of cases, whenever it comes to ISV solutions or third-party solutions, they're brought up by us as the implementation partner. Yeah. The customer is not asking for Click Dimensions, or is not asking for North 52, or is not asking for Kingsway Software, or whatever it is. They're just telling you what problems they have or what requirements they have, and it's our job to come up with solutions. Our solutions sometimes involve third-party solutions or vendors out there that have solved that problem for you already, and in some cases, those vendors just don't work. I've been involved in situations where I've suggested a solution, and in the middle of the project, the vendor goes through an acquisition, or they close shop, or whatever, and now you can't get a hold of anybody, and the company that you were selling the solution for that now bought the ISV that makes the solution, they said, no, we're not even going to support that solution anymore. And so those problems can happen. So how do you deal with vendors or ISV organizations that might not be as responsible as you implementing Dynamics?
Yeah, great one. The initial approach to that is going to be clarity, right? We shouldn't be implementing anything from an ISV that's not visible, where we're just putting it in and we haven't told the customer, because now you've put yourself in this place of you really are responsible. The other thing I would say, of course, is especially if we recommended it, we can't make that the customer's problem. We need to go figure out what's going on with that vendor. And similar to what we talked about earlier, if it turns out that they closed up shop, that the tool doesn't work, that we can't figure it out, or whatever that is, and we've done our work on our side, and we shouldn't be charging the customer for that because that's not what they signed up for, then we need to go back to them and, similar to what we talked about, say, so here's where we are with this. This is what I intended to do, and this is why I was going to use that tool. This is what's happened, and this is what I think that we should do now. What do you think about that, right? So I'm not just showing up saying it's broke and those guys are horrible, and because the customer doesn't care about that.
Yeah.
Right? They don't care about that.
Right.
And so that whole concept of, let me tell you what's happening, even when you start to miss your dates because you're waiting on them, there's nothing wrong with you saying, here's where I am and I'm trying to figure X out. Every customer hates a bunch of finger pointing, so don't do that. those guys,
Take
or
ownership.
whatever it is, right? I brought us into this. I had a reason why we're trying to do it. I'm talking with their CEO. I'm trying to figure out blah, blah, blah. I'll let you know next week, right? You surface and make visible exactly what's happening, and then you make the right decision for the, for the customer.
Makes sense. That's awesome. So far we've talked about Sandler. We talked about Business Think.
I didn't even know we were going to talk about Sandler
I know.
today.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. But, this show is listened to in the vast majority by consultants and solution architects and other MVPs, experts implementing Dynamics. What are some of the other things that you would recommend people focus on to become better at either dealing with conflicts like you, or just dealing with implementations and just the complexity of bringing a new solution to an organization, a new business application in this case?
Well, I could go off for
yeah
several hours on that topic. So let me try and winnow my thinking down. We talked about books. Actually, the book that you mentioned at the beginning of the show is a really good book for people to read. The concept of understanding the selling process, not from a selling, but from a consultative and how to actually help your customer, is a good one. I hate to say it because it's almost cliche at this point, but if you have not read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you need to go read it, because it's not titled that way, but it's all about how you manage conflict. It is all about empathy, right? Understanding first, right? Seek first to understand, and all of that. For consultants, I would say getting to the place where you can develop and understand what empathy is so that you can help your customers, and coming from that place is really important. The other thing that I would say is that little conversation that we had about having an opinion, that is my thing now. That is my thing, right? So many, so many of us are out there. We're doing really, really good work, and we're working in all these customers. And at the end of the day, we're afraid to tell this customer that we're talking to, I wouldn't do it like that. The reason why is because X, Y, and Z. I could be totally wrong, but this is why, right? And not just about the technology, about the business. I've seen several businesses fail. How do I keep you from getting into a place where we've got 5 different sales departments, and the whole project is going to not only take longer than it's supposed to, but it's going to also fail at the end of the day because nobody adopted? Let me tell you what happened. I worked with a company, it must have been 7 months ago. They had 5 departments just like you guys. And what I note, right, I can tell you that story and have an opinion about how you can do it, and most of us just won't cross the line, and get in there and help the customer. But what you find, everybody uses that word, trusted advisor, but if you're not advising, how are you ever going to reach that status, right?
Exactly.
And that's what that's just what I find. That to me is the leap, guys. We used to talk about that, right? That's what changes you from being a technician to actually consulting for a customer. And not everybody can be a consultant.
That's awesome. Will you be at the CRM G Summit this year?
I will.
All right. Do you have any sessions going on?
So I'm not sure. I have 3 that I've submitted for. I'm trying to get some other people to to do some of those, so I'm not sure how that's going to turn out. I have a really interesting training topic, though, that I've been just...
What is it?
You know me. The future of training. It includes the what Microsoft is doing with Stream, and it includes all the things that you're seeing on YouTube, and it includes the things that I'm seeing organizations be really successful with. It's forward thinking, but there's just so many patterns that I'm seeing and where things are going that I like to talk about that kind of stuff. So I'll be there either way. But hopefully Tony will give me a couple of sessions to chat too.
Absolutely. So I think people listening to this will want to meet you at the CRM G Summit, of course. But whoever cannot go, if they want to reach out to you, if they want to, say they enjoy the podcast or ask you any questions, what's the best way?
Email me directly, right? patrick.lewis @fullscope.com. And I will reply to everyone that I get.
All right. That's awesome. Thank you for joining me and
of
talking
course,
about
this was great.
I
love to talk.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for listening to our episode. As you know, you can go to crmmvppodcast.com to get to all of the episodes we recorded in the past, and let us know if you have any guests or any topics that you would like to cover in future episodes. And follow us on Twitter at CRM MVP Podcast.